EU banks do have exposure to Turkey, but we don't think it's as bad as the Eurozone crisis 2010 to 12.
Not necessarily, because it might be concentrated here as opposed to broadly based exposure. Keep in mind that during the time of the euro crisis, there was a broad swath of European banks that had exposure to the sovereign debt of places like Greece, of Spain, of Italy, of Ireland. Banks in the EU do have exposure to Turkey, but it's not all banks. It's not as widespread across the banking system. It tends to be concentrated more among some key Spanish banks, some key Italian banks, some key French banks. So the risks are concentrated.
But also, didn't we learn from the European debt crisis that just when you start worrying about European banks, the governments will come and bail them out?
We did, and there's a very good chance here that the ECB will come in and support the sovereign debt markets of these European countries, in part because you need those prices to be sustained to support the capital buffers in the balance sheets of these EU banks. So this is one way they can come in to help.
That would be to help, of course, the European nations, not to help Turkey.
Not to help Turkey.
Right.
So what happens to Turkey itself, even if there's not the contagion that we looked at in 10 to 12, what happens to Turkey itself?
There's really two paths for Turkey to take here. It could adopt the mantra of orthodoxy, of economic orthodoxy finally. Erdogan could relent, and that would mean tightening fiscal policy, as they started to do, admittedly, but really raise interest rates and potentially appeal to his allies, to the IMF, to get some bailout funds here. That's one path. I think the market would be very excited if that were to happen. At least it would dampen the panic.
Go to the IMF, where the U.S. is the largest shareholder in the fund. That would be very embarrassing, where the president doesn't even seem to indicate that they have that kind of
I didn't say that he would go to the IMF. I said there are two paths. This is one of them.
That's one.
Okay?
That would be embracing.
The other one is to finally disassociate themselves from the global capital markets in one fell swoop, and that would be to impose capital controls in Turkey. It would be in conjunction with liraizing, if you will, all the internal debts that these companies and these banks have that are currently in FX, in US dollars and euros, and that would effectively end the story for Turkey's relationship with the rest of the world.
But so I don't understand why either of these paths hasn't been followed yet. I can understand why he wouldn't have done it if we were 12 months ago, right, before his election. Yeah. But I mean, his grip on power is as tight as it's ever been.
That's
so
right.
Why doesn't he embrace whatever's the best long-term path? And
the opposition is in disarray, and maybe he's betting on that to think that, hey, look, maybe this is not so bad politically in the end after all. I can even withstand the recession given my level of support and the level of support for the AK. But the real reason he hasn't committed to orthodoxy is because he has wedded himself to a policy of low interest rates. And for a gentleman like this to turn around at this point and under this kind of pressure is difficult. Remember, he has billed himself as the protector of his people, and he has linked higher interest rates to a foreign conspiracy. To say that he's relenting to this conspiracy is to admit that he's no longer their protector. That's tough.